Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome a good friend and close part of Atlantik-Brücke for our virtual conversation today. He has been a guest and speaker at Atlantik-Brücke numerous times, Professor Charles Kupchan. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and a professor of international affairs at Georgetown University in the Walsh School of Foreign Service and Department of Government. From 2014 to 2017, Charles Kupchan served as a special assistant to the president and senior director for European affairs on the staff of the National Security Council in the Obama administration. He was also director for European affairs on the NSC during the first Bill Clinton administration. And before joining the Clinton NSC, he worked in the US Department of State on the policy planning staff. Charlie, it's great to have you today. And we are very curious to hear about your perspective on the current situation, the complexities awaiting us after this important election. And with that, I would like to hand over to our board member, Michael Werz, who will lead this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for introducing Charlie. Charlie, let's jump right in. Joe Biden has won this election, but Donald Trump still got 73 million Americans to vote for him, 10 million more than last time. What does that mean for the country?
Pleasure to join you, David and Michael. You know, this is a historical moment. The victory of Joe Biden couldn't come sooner. It breathes new life into liberal democratic politics. It pushes back against the wave of right-wing populism that we've seen on both sides of the Atlantic. But you know, it's going to be a tough period in American politics. It looks like the Republicans are going to keep hold of the Senate. That makes it difficult for Biden to govern. He needs to reach out not just to left-wing Democrats, but also to the 73 million people who wanted Trump to be reelected. So yes, the pendulum is swinging back to the political center. All of us can breathe a sigh of relief. I think the impact in Europe will be to drain support for the populist left and right. But let's make sure that we do not think this is a moment for complacency. This is a moment for hard work to address the underlying problems, the future of work, unemployment, wages, immigration, COVID, that have led to much discontent among our electorates.
Do I hear you right that you seem to suggest that the changes that we have lived through here in the United States over the past 4 years might be permanent, or can they be overcome?
I don't think we know the answer to that, Michael. I think that this is a moment when we know we have underlying problems, and it's too easy simply to turn our backs on the Trump era and say, oh, this was just a detour, let's forget about it. We can't do that because we see the same kind of forces in the UK, in Poland, in Hungary, even in Germany, where you have an undercurrent of right-wing populism. So I think we need to learn lessons from the Trump era, figure out why he was elected, why he just won almost 50% of the vote, just shy, and why he actually won many more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. That's a shocker because we knew Trump, we saw him on full display for 4 years. Many Americans still voted for him. Why? We need to ask that question and answer it successfully to make sure that Biden's victory is not just a temporary hiatus, but a return to the political center.
But you have mentioned the divisions within the Democratic Party, and there's a lot of younger voters and progressive voters that are expecting substantial social and political reforms from Joe Biden. Do you think he will try to deliver those reforms, which are mostly also documented in the new party platform? And if so, will he succeed in doing so?
You know, I think he will, to some extent, reach out to the progressive wing. I'm guessing that his cabinet will end up with some representatives from the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But Biden is a centrist. The United States is a center-right country. The Senate will likely be controlled by the Republicans. I think we can expect a Biden administration that is generally in the center of the political spectrum. That having been said, I think there are places where left-wing Democrats and right-wing Republicans actually can agree, particularly on the domestic issue of job creation, of backing away from free trade and confronting China, investment in infrastructure, investment in technology, bringing back manufacturing jobs. There actually wasn't a lot of daylight between people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren when they were running for president, and some of the things that right-wing, those who were catering from the Republican Party to the working class were saying. So I think Biden would be wise to look at where he can find ways of keeping the left wing of the party happy at the same time that he reaches out to the white working class. It's not an impossible task.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear you saying that Joe Biden is the right man at the right point in time for this country. You know him personally, having worked in senior positions in the Clinton and in the Obama administration. From your knowledge and from your personal interactions with Joe Biden, if you see him as the right person for this incredibly complex task, why is he the right person?
I do think he's the right person. And that's because we need a return to normalcy. We need a return to the traditions of liberal democracy that have been so hard to find over the last 4 years in the United States. Biden is, if nothing else, decent. He's a person of uncommon integrity. He's a family man. I'll very quickly tell a story of coming back from Europe on Air Force Two. He decides he wants to land in Wilmington so he can go home, sleep in his own bed before we go back to Washington. He comes to say goodnight. I'm talking to my daughter, Maya, 4 years old, on the phone. He grabs my phone and FaceTimes with her until his own staff grabs the phone from him and says, Mr. Vice President, it's time to get off the plane. That's the kind of guy he is. And so I think right now, many people in the United States are still shell-shocked by what's been going on here. Biden is the kind of person who can govern in the center and can convey to Americans that we're back in a situation in which decency, integrity, honor, dignity, liberal democratic values have returned to the Oval Office.
Asking you for brief answers for a couple of foreign policy questions. Joe Biden has said leaving the nuclear agreement with Iran was a self-inflicted wound. The Democratic Party platform was very clear that the JCPOA has to be reinitiated. Do you think that's possible at all, given the domestic situation here in Washington? This is obviously a big issue for our European allies.
Yes, I think a return to some kind of agreement with Iran is possible. We're in a worse place today than we were when the agreement existed, because Iran is now kind of producing new nuclear material. The nature of that agreement is very difficult to predict, but I do think that Biden will return to an effort to deal diplomatically with the Iran situation. And in general, I think Europeans can expect someone who goes back to the traditions of Atlanticism and multilateralism, but I would invite Europeans, and Germans in particular, to get ready to step up to the plate, to do more, to increase defense spending, to say, okay, we're going to go do something in the Eastern Mediterranean or Libya, because now that we have someone we like in the Oval Office, we are prepared to be better allies.
My next question is related. Obviously, China and the strategic emergence of China as a global player is a big item and a topic of every single discussion here in Washington. And it seems that there are great expectations in the Biden camp and in the transition team of greater transatlantic cooperation vis-a-vis China. European outlook towards China is mostly economic. Our outlook is mostly geostrategic. It's a little bit of a shorthand, but I think by and large it's accurate. Do you think the Europeans and the Americans are ready to come together and develop a China strategy?
I think, Michael, that dealing with China and probably Russia as well will require a lot of management. And you're right to say that, the US is more of a geostrategic player in the Asia Pacific, while the Europeans are looking more at trade and investment and Belt and Road. So I do think that right out of the box, there should be a transatlantic effort to forge a common approach to China. My sense is that Europeans have grown somewhat more skeptical of Beijing over the course of the COVID pandemic. Lots of heavy-handed diplomacy coming from Chinese diplomats in Europe. So yes, I do think a a common approach is possible. On the other hand, I also see there bumpy moments ahead when the Europeans, when push comes to shove, aren't going to want to get in the middle of increasing US-Chinese rivalry. And as we've seen in the past, they're going to be very mindful of the need to reach out to China as the EU tries to rebuild and breathe new life into its economy in the wake of the pandemic shutdown.
Last question, Charlie. You have the Atlantik-Brücke members listening to you. If you were asked to advise them of how to restart transatlantic relations from a German perspective, what would you tell them? What should the top 2 or 3 priorities be from a German perspective?
Well, you know, I think that the main point should be to welcome back the United States to the stage as a reliable, democratic, sensible partner with its head screwed back on. Americans need to hear that. Americans need to hear that this change of government in the United States is something deeply, profoundly, warmly welcomed on the other side of the Atlantic. The second thing I'd say is that I do think Biden will be very sensitive to what allies are prepared to do. We're suffering through an economic downturn of a sort we haven't experienced since the 1930s. And I think that Biden will want to demonstrate that when allies are respected and listened to, rather than insulted and lectured to, they are prepared to do more. So I think even a symbolic decision by the German government to modestly increase defense spending, a movement toward working with France and others for more military capability, a concrete effort to take on new tasks, whether it's in the Mediterranean, Libya, Syria, Nagorno-Karabakh. These would be very important messages here in Washington and the rest of the country, that when the United States returns to being a member of the Atlantic democratic community, it works to its benefit in concrete ways.
Thank you, Charlie. We hope to see you in Berlin next year in person when all of this is over. And thank you again for making time.
I agree with that, Michael. My only regret is that we're not doing this in person in Berlin and that we can't break bread and have some good wine together tonight.